Hi folks, as you're joining, see if you can start video and audio. Kasara, could you say something? Give me an audio check on the bridge. Nope, got nothing. Jay, I guess you could be the other person. If you're hearing me, could you try to say something back?
Sure. Can you hear anything now?
Oh,
Okay.
maybe. Hang on.
Oh,
Yep, there, I've got sound now.
okay, good. And just let you know, I added something to the hot topics. Let me take a minute just about the project manager for the tool, for the Rpc tools, and my
Sure.
inability to find someone to do that.
Can
Liz, I'm wondering if the link in the calendar didn't get updated. The people are pinging me for the link.
And you're right, Robert. The link in the calendar does not work for me. Only the one in Node.
I did update it, but not too long before the meeting, so maybe it didn't refresh soon enough for people. Sorry about that.
Yeah, calendar subscription refreshes are done by the client, and they're generally configured at 1 week by default. So they're not brilliant that way.
Yeah, and the Metico links are different every time for this, so it changes every time.
Maybe we should change the calendar to say just go look at the notes page. And the notes page changes every time, so we couldn't put a link there, but we'll work it out. So I'll give people an extra couple of minutes to work through that bit of impedance before we start. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. We'll go ahead and start. We'll probably rearrange things. I know I'm expecting Glenn, and I want him to be here before we jump into the new production server topic. So we'll route around that for the moment and come back to it. I received email from Alice out of band that there are no blocking issues. She provided input to the CMT to consider at their next meeting for changes that we might prioritize over others. So I think just capturing no blocking issues in the notes for that topic today is sufficient. We'll skip the deployment of the production server until Glenn has a chance to join. For moving the rest of the services off of tools.ietf.org and redirecting it, we did set up a temporary BAP service so that the RPC has something that they can use until the functionality of BAP can be integrated into author tools. The long pole in the tent for finishing the tools migration remains the bibxml service, which we'll talk about next. For that, you'll see that there are some nearly 50 remaining issues. Almost all of them are about data quality, not about actual application functionality. We think that it's in a deployable state at this point, and we are going to try to bring up an instance either on our own fabric either later this week or next and begin the acceptance process, taking the data repositories and moving them into a organization that we control. If people haven't been watching the way that this thing has been being developed, there is one aspect of it I wanted to put in everyone's head. The web service relies on data in GitHub repositories for what it serves. And there are GitHub actions in those repositories. There's a repository for each of what traditionally had been bibxml1, bibxml2, etc., aka bibxml IDs, bibxml RFCs, bibxml IEEE. There are actions in those repositories that go feed from the canonical sources and make both Relaton formatted entities and bibxml formatted entities that just live in those repositories. And the web service feeds from those, caching as it needs to. So when it comes up from scratch, it just goes and gets things from those repositories. So the important connotation is that our service will fundamentally at this point rely on GitHub. So as part of its running. Now, if we ever need to move away from that, it would just be a matter of putting those things in a Git repository somewhere and changing what's currently in those GitHub actions to be cron running somewhere. So there's it's not a difficult thing that we're being locked into, but I wanted everyone to be aware that it existed. Do we have Glenn yet? I sent him a text, so hopefully we'll see him shortly.
Robert, you have a question from Carsten in the chat.
I'm looking.
I just was curious whether I can just clone the repository and get a backup instance.
Yes, it's repositories, but yes, you certainly could.
Now I lost you.
Not from my end, I don't think. The answer is yes. I'll type it also as well.
But the actions aren't in the repository, are they?
The YAML for the actions is, yes. So you can see what...
Oh, yeah, of course, right. Got it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just lost all media while you answered my question, so I haven't heard the answer.
Yeah, I sent the answer into the text.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds like you got media again. That's great. Which is going to be good for the next topic. Yeah, I don't see Glenn still. There's a question about whether or not we're doing the right thing with our API design at Author Tools and at the BibXML service. We designed these things from the beginning to require a data tracker personal API key. The notion behind this was that we would be following a pattern similar to what Cloudflare's API Shield follows and other entities that are protecting APIs, that you have an allow list. You know, basically somebody comes to you with a thing that says yes, they get to use this, and the API key was what we were planning to use. But this has tension with the APIs that have existed in the past at places like xml.rpc.tools.IETF.org that were just free to use by anybody anonymously. Karsten in particular is running into this with KDRSC, which if it doesn't have a local XML.RSC will use currently the xml.rpc.tools.ietf.org to run xml.rpc on the tool's behalf. And if we stick with this API construct, to get what we would want out of it, the users of Karsten's tool would have to go get an API key from the data tracker and tell the tool about it before it could go do this thing. And Karsten has said several times that that introduces too much impedance, too much trouble for the user, and he doesn't want to take it down that path. One of the things that alternatives that we discussed was creating a key just for the application, but by the nature of the application, that key would be accessible to anybody that bothered to look, at which point we don't have any advantage for having keys at all, because random robot could go grab that key and start doing stuff. So the question is, do we stay on the path that we're on right now and try to find some other way for tools like KDRSC to get the kind of access that they need? Or do we back off of the position that we want this positive identification kind of mechanic and just open the APIs for use and then make changes later if we ever actually see abuse? Jay, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Isn't the impedance not in having a key and getting a key, but in the process by which one gets a key? You know, so if getting a key is trivial, then there is very limited impedance. But if getting a key is complex and, you know, requires multiple email round trips and all that kind of stuff, then it is, then that's where the impedance is.
Yeah, so it's creating a data tracker account and then asking for a key from the data tracker account.
Yeah, so can that be automated? So that can we provide an API for that or something so that Karsten could, you know, call that API? I don't know how you feel about this, Karsten. I'm giving you work, but, you know, so could we simplify that in some way rather than, you know, rather than sort of abandoning this?
Yeah, that certainly can be done. Now, before we go down that rat hole, the question really is, do we need this API key? Right now, the web interface for Author Tools actually uses a second API that doesn't need an API key. And of course, I can simply use that second API for the KDRFC access, and then I don't need an API key. It's apparently not a published API, but it's not hard to reverse engineer it, and I did it. So do we really need that? The reason why installing an API key is a little bit pesky is that KDIFC is used from a lot of make files, different repositories, and so on. And it's not entirely clear where someone would put their API key to make all these various instances and installations actually work together. That's easy to do in Unix, but I hesitate making sure that works in Windows as well.
Kassar, do we actually have a second API? I thought that what the UI was using was exactly the same API, but with its own API key as a secret.
Yes, we do have a second API. It's a reverse proxy to the actual one.
Mm-hmm.
It has some restrictions, but someone can just fiddle with things and use the command line to submit one. If it's not from a browser, it doesn't check the domain whether it's coming from author tools or not.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like effectively we've got just an open API anyhow, with just a little bit of work. So let me ask, is there, even though we had these hopes that we would learn a little bit about usage and have a better knob for controlling abuse, if abuse ever appeared by requiring these API keys, is there a fundamental objection to just falling back to where we were and saying, you know, this is an open resource that anybody can use. We're just providing free compute for these translation services in the case of author tools, and wait and deal with it if it turns out that it is, you know, something that gets abused.
But there is, I mean, I tried to get the secret key as well for doing some API access. Honestly, I spent 10 minutes on it, and then I gave up, simply. So there are friction. Now, if we are more concerned about abuse, we can still do the rate limiting on anonymous queries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we fix the problem. And we only, of course, cause a problem for everyone using the anonymous. If one is bad, we put all the people in the same basket. But at least we save the resources, right?
All right. Well, why don't we go down that path for now? So we will accept a key if it's available and track it. And if we get to the point where we need to change levels of service based on the key, we at least have that available to us. All right.
One possibility is to embed, Mint a special anonymous key for XML to RFC. Probably more work than it's worth, and then we can just track that one instance. Or just some other way for Karsten to indicate this is, his script. But whatever. Wait until it becomes a problem seems reasonable.
Well, it does require a little amount of reverse engineering to find out how this API2 works. So whether people are going to the trouble to mount a distributed denial of service attack on the IETF servers, I think our attack surface is pretty small there.
Yeah, it's compute. It's really all it is. Okay. If anybody has any other thoughts about this later after they've had a chance to think about it, please weigh in on the tools discussed list. Otherwise, we'll take this alternate approach. Zulip is up and running. I don't plan to bring it up again unless we run into issues or we get to the point where we are actually looking at the details of integration of Metico and Zulip. Jay, do you want to talk about the RPC tools?
Thank you. So just a reminder from the notes here, I need a contractor to work with the RPC for what will probably be about a 2-year project, or from now until the end of next year, I imagine. The role starts off as a BA role, largely doing requirements analysis for a full replacement of their tool chain. And they're then working with the RPC to help them decide what nature of replacement they want, because currently they do a lot of things on command line tools. And do they want to replace that with a lot of command line tools, or do they want to have some kind of workflow system or an off-the-shelf package or something like that? And then supporting the production and the running of a tender on that, and for someone to develop that tool chain, and then project managing the client-side project management of the implementation of that and the delivery of that. And I have spectacularly failed to get anybody to do this, both through the RFP and through shoulder tapping people and through going to church and through rolling bones and all that kind of stuff. So I am now going to do an RFP again, unless anybody here can come up with a really nice way where I can get somebody or something, or has any suggestions or any help for me.
Well, assuming my current role winds down as when expected, I could probably do it. Perhaps we should chat offline and see if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep. Right. Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any other suggestions or anything?
In the shoulder tapping capacity, there are a few other people I could tap to at least get them to look.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
going to say don't let John leave until he signs up to do this, but you could also ping other people who've responded on other RFPs in the shoulder tapping area, which I'm sure you've done.
Yeah, that's a point. I hadn't particularly thought about that, because it's
know,
been a while
general-
since we've
general
had anybody.
like Ribos is the one that came to mind.
Who was, sorry?
Ribos?
Right, okay, yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Back to you, Robert.
All right. Working down things, we have a design team that's going to start in on describing the IT infrastructure services, an initial call to get some experiences from Wes Hardiker's automation of the B route as worked examples of things that we can of mechanisms that we could use, and start talking about what our infrastructure should look like and how it should behave when we are on a different target that is more automatable. The rest of the workshops, Jay, I think you were going to have somebody put together a poll for priority. I don't think that poll's gone out yet.
No, apologies, I haven't got around to that. Sorry, COVID and holidays, I'll get to that soon.
Yep. As you've seen, the completed projects, the SVN track migration is complete. We still have some track out there for people that have just been using the wikis that we plan to have. A crowdsourced migration into Wiki.js that's waiting for us to finish the data tracker Wiki.js integration, which is behind many of the other things that we're going to be talking about later in the call. I'm bringing it up here so that we know that it's still on our plan, but we haven't gotten cycles to it yet. So the data tracker has been running through Cloudflare for several weeks, reasonably successfully. A few notable exceptions: the model, which is what really web service models ought to follow, are more strictly enforced by places like Cloudflare. The notion that you would have a transaction complete quickly and not pinned for a long period of time is broken by our draft submission views and several nudges that we get from the RC editor and from IANA when state changes, where we go out and do a whole lot of processing before we return. And we are looking at changing these workflows to be asynchronous. This is going to impact the people that have automated tooling for submission to the draft submission API, Martin Thompson's repositories in particular, and I have yet to reach him, but I need to coordinate with him on the when and the how of the change that we make to that API so that these submissions can succeed when the processing that is required to complete them is longer than the timeout that Cloudflare enforces on us. I have in the meantime a workaround. We tested this with John yesterday. If you just hear of anybody that is having trouble submitting a draft because it's large and this timeout is hitting them, the answer will be to send them to the manual submission process, and I will teach the Secretariat a way to go around the proxies to do these submissions. We still have work to do to make it so that our NOMCOM eligibility calculations are correct. This is becoming pressing as we're going to want to see the NOMCOM before we get to July. I expect we'll be collecting volunteers soon, but the work to get these changes in place is likely to come in over the rest of this month and the early part of May. Distracted, of course, by the server migration that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. We are at the moment.
And of course, no need to insist on being ready, right, for NOMCOM.
So if we miss being ready for this next NOMCOM, it just means that somebody, probably the Secretariat, will have to look a little bit more carefully about whether or not the people that are that the tool thinks are eligible really are, and that we didn't exclude someone that should have not been excluded.
So we have a fallback plan, basically, manual procedures.
Yeah,
okay.
it's a bad one. We should avoid it, but
of course. Yeah, good point.
We're working very hard right now to get to the point where we can make a new data tracker release, and our plan at the moment is for that release to be on the Bootstrap, to include the Bootstrap 5 work. So if we follow through with what I'm hoping we can do later this week or early next, we will actually shift the production data tracker to the Bootstrap 5 styling. And then everybody will be shocked and will get rage and violence because of the surprise, even though we've tried to warn people about this for a while. Unless anybody has concerns, we're going to continue down this push. I don't know if we should signal this in any way at the moment. I could send another note to chairs. I could send a note to IETF that this is going to be coming. But thoughts, Greg? Do you think there's anything else we should do differently?
I think another heads up wouldn't hurt. And the other question I had was, are you expecting that the colors will match the current data tracker, or will they be like Sandbox? Or
The colors will be the colors you see on the Sandbox, except for the top menu bar, which will become a Bootstrap blue.
Got it. Okay. Yep. Anyway, I think another note to the folks that you mentioned would be good, and I'm happy to help if I can do that, but also happy to stand aside.
Sure. I'll coordinate with you. later in the day. Kasara, let's go through your sections here.
The main there was a release on Auto Tools this week, and the big change was I had to temporarily remove GoASCII tool because that tool had a change after a year or so, and that change break lots of things. And I don't think that the people who's developing that tool is going to move forward with the tool. They are suggesting few folks, and some of those folks don't use that tool as a command rather than a module. So I have temporarily removed that from other tools until I can find a better way to install it. We still have ASVG on other tools for ASCII diagrams to convert them to SVG. Other thing about auto tools is we are planning to have a release every fortnight. So every 2 weeks, we are trying to make a auto tools release. Any questions about auto tools?
You got Cabo's note in the chat. It's next time when we're going to pull something, we should give people a heads up.
Yeah, just a simple note, because I can, of course, work around things like that. SVG and Goat are functionally equivalent. And I probably made the mistake of distinguishing it in the input language. So now what I should do is map Goat in the input language to actually calling AASVG. And if I had known this earlier, I could have done this so nobody notices the whole thing. I think the damage is very limited, so this is just a heads up for future changes like this. Just send a one-liner, and then we can adapt to that. The other thing I would like to point out is that the Cramdown RFC tool changes much more often than every fortnight, and people not being able to move to the new version of the tool becomes an actual problem when there are fixes that have been initiated by users of the tool, and then they have co-authors that can't use the new version until we have this 2-week period elapsed. So I would hope that we get a more regular update of that specific tool, if necessary, so that people don't have to wait for 2 weeks for fixes to become available.
I think we can eventually look at ways to automate that, because both are on GitHub now. We don't have automatic way of deploying auto tools yet, but when you have that under the hood on IETF servers, we can look into automate it. So because it's not going to be a big change to update Cramdown on auto tool side. So, but I'll keep right now. I am doing manual releases, so I will keep an eye on Cramdown for changes, and try to match that pace, at least with the version updates.
Great, thank you. And maybe I should also mention that I do have a plan for how to make the tool coverage much wider than we have at the moment, but maybe we should wait for the current wave of activity to be over before we start that activity.
Kasari, go ahead and move forward to XML RSC.
So on XML to RFC, there are no real releases in previous period, but there'll be a one coming soon, I guess this week or the next week with few fixes. On the XML to RFC side, the development right now, I'm looking at any bug fixes that really needs to happen, and I'm putting my time on the tools replacement. So that's it from me. Any questions on XML to RFC?
All right. I don't see Ryan on the call. If anybody has questions about the things that he's commented on in the notes, send it to ours to Tools Discuss, please. At the web analytics line, I'll note that we have adding Matomo to the data tracker as a work item. It'll likely happen after we get through the big set of disruptions that we're working through right now. We have an initial set of recommendations from our database health contractors. They are fairly simple. We're planning to implement them after transitioning to the new server. Nothing particularly earth-shattering in there. It's basically a distilled set of recommendations from the normal scripts that you would use to tune MySQL. ZX Security is standing by, waiting for us to complete the transition to the new server before they start in on testing the remaining set of the web services and retesting the data tracker. We're currently on their schedule for mid-May to mid-June, and they're willing to adjust should our transition to the new server need to take longer than it's currently taking. I'm going to skip forward to the RFC editor model transition based on conversations I've had with various stakeholders. The need to have support for the new model in the data tracker is expected to come in sometime around mid-May. So we are waiting to make those changes until we are post new server deployment and on the Bootstrap 5 branch as well. If that's not true, if somebody sees a need earlier than that, please let me know. That leaves us outside of taking the other things that we haven't talked about besides the server transition is read to the server transition itself, and that's going to take all of our available remaining time. If anybody else has any other business that they really want to get to on this call, let's go ahead and cover it now. Not hearing anything. Glenn has a replacement for IETF-A up and running. He's got a process that is keeping it in sync. We are iterating with him right now on improving that process so that we have a correct replication and we have as little downtime as possible. But the thumbnail estimates at the moment, based on watching what the synchronization is taking, is it will end up with a 2 to 4 hour downtime. And the downtime will be across many services, most notably mail. And that means list mail won't be delivered for that up to 4 hour period. It won't be lost. It will be queued mostly on the senders systems because we will just stop accepting for a little while and we'll catch the retransmissions. We need to verify that anything that happens internally, we're trying to work. I'm working with Glenn right now on a plan that will let us have close to zero downtime of the data tracker itself, even though mail coming out of the data tracker would go into a queue and be delayed. Wes, go ahead, and anybody, there are so few people here, just turn on your audio and
Yeah, I
jump
didn't
in.
want to get in the way. So the real question was, right now you guys have only one MX record for IETF.org, and I've always wondered why, but you might consider just as a fallback adding an MX for a short period of time through an outsourced agency. There's certainly plenty that could do it. I'm sure there's probably companies within the IETF that would be willing to do it temporarily, just to queue it all guaranteedly somewhere else, to not depend on all of the sending parties doing the queuing.
I'll carry that suggestion to Glenn.
Yeah, not to mention that some sender already sent a warning email after 1 hour. I was unable to deliver this email. I will retry later.
Mm-hmm.
Which is 4 hours by default on postfix and send mail, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. So my opening volley for when we do this, assuming that our testing between now and then doesn't show a reason for us not to, is during the work week on Monday morning Pacific time, April 25th, so that we can have the right hands available to assist with any bobbles if there are bobbles along the way. Lars had a last minute conflict with this call. I confirmed with him that, as with his chair hat on, he doesn't object to us taking a chunk out of a normal work day like this. Any thoughts from anybody else on the call? Are you comfortable with this? I am hoping that as we go through the next steps after this one, that this will be our last multi-service outage. We have one more data tracker outage that is going to be big, but this would be the last time that we have, the issue with everything going away because we're messing with the infrastructure under it.
Can we rely on Cloudflare to present something? The server is an unexpected maintenance or something, because they check, right? If the origin is not there, there's something there.
So the Cloudflare can be configured for things that don't change, things that aren't forms, right? So the website itself, we're not expecting it to actually go down as we're moving. But even if it had to, we could configure Cloudflare to serve the pages that it has. This is not as easy to do with the data tracker. Most of the data tracker users are logged in, and we have Cloudflare necessarily configured to not cache most of the data tracker pages for anybody that is logged in, right? So they wouldn't have anything to serve to those people. If they logged out, we could probably configure it to have something available for people that are just attempting to browse. But it's a hit or miss kind of experience.
And all in all, it's only for 2 or 3 hours, right? So as long as it's announced, it's okay.
So if people are on board with this, I will get together with Greg. Oh, there you are. Sorry, I lost your image. This is a kind of message that maybe we should send out super visibly with the, hey, things are going to be disrupted And we should probably send it out today because that is less than 2 weeks from now. Today or tomorrow, if today is too crazy. But all right, I'm not hearing major pushback. I gotta admit, this is not my favorite way to do things. I'm going to be losing a lot of sleep over the next couple of weeks over this, so I hope very much that we don't ever have to do it quite this way again. So. I'd really hoped to have Glenn here to have some conversations, some detailed conversations about the actual mechanics, but we don't. So.
And by the way, if we cannot get a backup server, does it mean that we don't have one?
I don't understand your question.
So we are doing migration, right? So typically when you do migration, you pull down, you have 2 servers, one active, one standby or whatever. You put the standby, you migrate this, and then you switch the role. And that's if you have good synchronization, that's very easy. It should be really easy. So do we have a backup?
Yes, we essentially have that. I just realized that I had intended to have a link for the plan that Glenn had put together available for you to see. I will send that to Tools Development shortly so that you can skim through what we're planning to do. But yeah, we have IETF-A and IETF-N. They're separate machines. And the basic plan is as you described. There will be a point where some services on IETF-A are stopped. There is a final replication step from IETF-A to IETF-N. Then certain services like making the MySQL database master on IETF-N will happen, and services will come up on IETF-N. If the services were architected a little bit differently, we could do this where the cutover time was instantaneous, but some of them are not, and the dependencies as we understand them on the mail processing chain in particular are such that we need to have the mail queue quiescent while there are some rather large resynchronization efforts that go by. I'll be talking with Ryan and Glenn between now and then, and if we discover that those are not in fact something that needs to happen before the mail service is resumed, then we can cut that down time to something much smaller. So right now, just the file system rsync is that final file system rsync is taking 2 hours just for the sheer number of files that it's checking to see if they have changed or not, right? So, and that's something that I'm working with Glenn on attempting to tune so that that we can shrink that window as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the information.
Unless anybody has anything else, I think that we've done what we need to do on the call today. And thank everyone again for their participation in these calls. And we will see you online as we go through this transition, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about when we get to the next version of this meeting. So,
Thank you.
thanks all.